I threw away moldy food, and my family disowned me. There's a specific kind of silence that settles in a home when you know you're no longer welcome. It's not peaceful. It's a heavy, suffocating blanket of unspoken words and simmering resentment. I learned that silence intimately 3 weeks ago, and it's been eating at me ever since, a constant, dull ache in my chest. My family is telling me I'm completely in the wrong, that I'm the one who messed up. But the more I replay the events, the more I feel like I'm losing my mind. It all started when I lost my job, and my sister kicked me out over a $3 moldy takeout container that I threw away while cleaning her fridge. To understand the absurdity of it all, you have to understand my sister, Julie. At 29, she is, and has always been, the undisputed star of our family. She's the one who charts her life with precision, hitting every milestone with a grace and speed that leaves the rest of us blinking in her wake. A degree in engineering from a prestigious college, a high-paying job secured before the ink on her diploma was dry, and her own condo at the tender age of 26. Our parents speak of her accomplishments in reverent tones, their voices swelling with a pride that was always a little different, a little louder than any pride they ever showed for me. I'm 32, and my path has been less of a straight line and more of a meandering trail through a dense forest. I took the community college route, bounced between various jobs, warehouse logistics, retail, even a brief stint in food service, and spent most of my 20s just trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted. My parents never explicitly said they were disappointed, but I could feel it in the pauses, hear it in the way their questions about my life always ended with a sigh. I wasn't Julie, and in our family, that was a quiet but profound failure. About 8 months ago, the precarious structure of my life came tumbling down. The warehouse where I'd been working for a few years announced it was downsizing. My name was on the list. I had some savings, a meager cushion that would barely cover 2 months of rent for the tiny studio apartment that already consumed the majority of my paycheck. Panic began to set in, a cold, creeping dread that kept me up at night. When Julie heard, she called immediately. Her voice was practical, devoid of pity. "It doesn't make sense for you to burn through your savings," she'd said. "I have a 2-bedroom condo. The second room is just full of junk. You can stay with me until you get back on your feet." It was an offer I couldn't refuse, a lifeline I grabbed with both hands. So, last September, I packed up my life into a dozen cardboard boxes and moved into the spare room of my sister's immaculate condo. From the moment I walked through the door, I was determined not to be a burden. I felt like a guest, a charity case, and I wanted to earn my keep in any way I could. While she was at work, I became the unofficial housekeeper. I did every dish, scrubbed the countertops until they gleamed, took out the trash and recycling without being asked, and vacuumed every weekend. I even started cooking dinner a few times a week, try to have a hot meal ready for her when she got home. Julie's work schedule was grueling. She was usually out the door by 7 in the morning and rarely returned before 6 in the evening. She'd come home exhausted, and I figured the least I could do, since I wasn't paying a dime in rent, was to make her life a little easier. "You don't have to do all that," she told me once, waving a dismissive hand. "Just focus on the job hunt." But I couldn't. I needed to contribute, to feel like I was pulling my weight. For the first 2 months, things were surprisingly easy, comfortable even. It was the most time we'd spent together since we were kids. My days were a structured routine of scrolling through job boards, tailoring my resume, and firing off applications. I kept the condo spotless. In the evenings, we'd often collapse on her plush sofa, watch some mindless TV, and talk about nothing in particular. She never once made me feel like an imposition, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. In November, I landed a part-time job stocking shelves at a local grocery store. The pay was abysmal, but it was income. It was something. With my first paycheck, I started buying groceries and household supplies, insisting it was my turn to contribute financially, however small the amount. Then in early December, the dynamic shifted. Julie announced she had a big work conference in another state. "I'll be gone for almost 2 weeks," she said, an edge of stress in her voice as she packed. As she walked out the door on a Tuesday morning, she turned back, her brow furrowed with last-minute instructions. "Don't forget to water the plants," she said, pointing to the collection of leafy greens by the window. "And make sure the trash goes out on Friday morning." I gave her a casual wave. "Sure, no problem. Have a good trip." The first week of her absence was a strange sort of bliss. The empty condo felt cavernous, and I relished the solitude. I could leave my shoes by the door, watch whatever I wanted on TV without negotiation, and not worry about being in her way. It was a brief, welcome respite from the constant, low-level anxiety of being a guest in someone else's home. On the Sunday of the second week, with Julie due back in 5 days, I treated myself to Chinese food. I sprawled on the couch, eating sweet and sour chicken directly from the carton while binge-watching a show she hated. I couldn't finish it all, so I scraped the leftovers into one of the cheap, black plastic containers the restaurant provided, snapped on the flimsy lid, and stuck in the back of the fridge. Then, I promptly forgot all about it. Fast forward to Thursday night. Julie was coming home the next day, and I was doing a final sweep of the condo to make sure everything was perfect. I wiped down the counters, fluffed the couch cushions, and went to grab a bottle of water from the fridge. That's when I saw it. Tucked behind a carton of milk was the forgotten container of Chinese food. The moment I pulled it out, a putrid, sour smell hit me like a physical blow. I recoiled, my nose wrinkling in disgust. I cautiously lifted the lid, and my stomach churned at the sight of the fuzzy, greenish-blue mold that had colonized the surface of the chicken. It was vile. Acting on pure instinct, I held my breath, walked the 3 steps to the trash can under the sink, and tossed the entire thing in, container and all. It was a flimsy, disposable thing, the kind that probably cost the restaurant pennies. In my mind, I was doing a service, eliminating a biohazard from my sister's pristine refrigerator. I didn't think twice about it. Julie got home around 8 o'clock the next night, looking utterly drained from her travels. I helped her with her bags and asked about the conference. Productive but exhausting, she mumbled, heading straight for her room to unpack. I left her to it and went back to the living room, settling in to watch a movie. About 20 minutes later, she emerged from her room, her expression unreadable. "Hey," she said, her voice flat. "Did you throw away one of my containers?" My heart gave a little jolt. "Oh yeah," I said, still focused on the TV. "The Chinese food one. It had gone completely bad. It was full of mold." I expected a thanks, or at least a nod of understanding. Instead, I watched as her face transformed. Her brows knitted together, her lips thinned into a hard line, and a strange, cold anger flickered in her eyes. "Why didn't you just wash it?" she asked, her voice rising with an intensity that seemed wildly disproportionate to the situation. I sat up confused. "I told you it was disgusting," I explained, trying to keep my own voice calm. "The food was covered in mold, and the smell was awful. I just tossed the whole thing." "You had no right," she snapped, her voice getting louder. "You have no right to throw away my things." "Hier, dumbfound." "Julie, it was a cheap takeout container. It probably cost $3, if that." It was the wrong thing to say. "I don't care if it cost a penny," she yelled, taking a step closer. "It was my property. You live in my home, and you don't get to just throw my belongings in the trash without asking me first." The argument exploded from there, escalating with a terrifying speed. I tried to defend myself, to appeal to logic. "I was just cleaning. I've been doing all the cleaning, all the dishes for months, trying to be helpful." "That was your choice," she shot back. "That doesn't give you permission to make decisions about my belongings." Frustration boiled up inside me, hot and sharp. "This is ridiculous. You're this upset over a worthless piece of plastic." That was the final straw. Her face went rigid, her eyes like chips of ice. "If you can't respect my things, then you can't live here," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I want you out, by the end of the weekend." I just stood there, speechless, the air crackling with her fury. I thought she was bluffing, that she was just blowing off steam after a long trip. But the look on her face was deadly serious. Without another word, she turned on her heel, went back to her room, and shut the door with a decisive click that echoed the finality of her verdict. My mind was reeling. Kicked out? Over a takeout container? It didn't make sense. Shaking, I pulled out my phone and texted my best friend, Nathan. We'd known each other since high school, and he was the closest thing I had to a brother. I asked if I could crash on his couch for a bit, my thumbs fumbling on the screen. He called me instantly. "What happened, man?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I gave him the short, surreal version of the story. "You're kidding me," he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Over a container? Of course, you can stay with us. Don't worry about it." The next day was a blur of misery and humiliation. I packed my few belongings into boxes, the silence in the condo thick and suffocating. Julie barely looked at me, her presence a cold, disapproving weight in the apartment. As I was loading the last box into my car, she came to the doorway. "I hope you learned something from this," she said, her arms crossed over her chest. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, my own anger finally surfacing. "You need to understand boundaries," she replied, her tone dripping with condescension. I didn't dignify that with a response. I just got in my car and drove to Nathan's place, my sister's words ringing in my ears. Nathan and his girlfriend, Kelly, welcomed me with open arms and sympathetic ears. But on Sunday, my mom called. The moment I heard her voice, I knew Julie had already gotten to her. "What did you do to your sister?" she asked, skipping any form of greeting. I recounted the entire ludicrous story, expecting some level of support, some acknowledgement of how insane this all was. Instead, she immediately took Julie's side. "She was kind enough to let you stay with her, and you disrespected her," my mom said, her voice sharp with disappointment. "Mom, I was cleaning up moldy food. That's all I did." "You overstepped," she cut me off. "It's Julie's home, her space. You should have asked. You need to call her and apologize." I was incredulous. Apologize? She kicked me out onto the street over a $3 container. Do you really think that's a reasonable reaction? It's not about the container, she insisted, parroting a line that would become my family's mantra. It's about respect. She has every right to be upset. You're being ungrateful. I tried to argue, to bring up the months I'd spent cooking and cleaning, but she wasn't having it. That doesn't matter. It's her house, her rules. Call your sister and fix this. The next day, my dad called. He'd gotten a story from my mom and delivered the same verdict. When you're a guest in someone's home, you follow their rules, no matter what, he said, his voice heavy with paternal authority. But throwing away moldy food isn't breaking a rule, I pleaded. It's common sense. It's about asking permission first, he countered. Julie worked hard for everything she has. She deserves to be respected in her own home. The conversation went in circles, a carousel of blame with me at the center. No one seemed to grasp the sheer insanity of the punishment. I was homeless, sleeping on a friend's couch, and my entire family was treating me like I had committed an unforgivable crime. A week after I moved out, I swallowed my pride and texted Julie. I wrote that I still didn't think throwing away a moldy container was wrong, but I was sorry that it had upset her. Her response came hours later, a single cold sentence. Your apology doesn't sound sincere. I didn't reply. The following weeks were a bleak landscape of couch surfing and parental pressure. My mom called repeatedly, her lectures becoming more insistent. You need to make a real apology, she'd say. Julie is hurt that you don't see what you did wrong. When I asked her to specify my crime, she had a list ready. Not asking permission, being disrespectful, not appreciating Julie's generosity. Each accusation felt like a small, sharp jab. I was stuck in a nightmare of someone else's logic. My friends, Nathan and Kelly, were my only lifeline to sanity. Your family sounds controlling, Nathan said one night. Julie completely overreacted. Kelly, always the diplomat, added, some people are just really particular about their things. But even she couldn't defend the eviction. Meanwhile, I was acutely aware of my presence disrupting their lives. Kelly worked from home, and I could see the polite strain on her face as I occupied her living room, her workspace, all day. I felt like a massive, unemployed piece of furniture. The grocery store job barely paid for my phone and gas, and my savings had dwindled to a terrifying $200. I wasn't planning on dwelling on it, but then things started to happen. Pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know I was solving began to fall into place. After another 3 weeks on Nathan and Kelly's couch, I finally landed a full-time job. It was data entry at a logistics company, mind-numbingly dull, but it was stable and it came with a steady paycheck. It was enough. I found a small studio apartment 30 minutes from the office and moved in 2 weeks later. Nathan and Kelly were saints, helping me move the few possessions that hadn't been sold or left behind. The freedom of having my own space again, however small, was intoxicating. A few days after I moved in, my mom called. Have you talked to Julie yet? She asked, her voice laced with a familiar, weary disappointment. No, I said, my voice firm. I have my own place now and a full-time job. I don't need to apologize for anything. It isn't about need, she sighed. It's about family. I told her I had to go and ended the call before she could launch into another lecture. The real surprise came a week later. A knock on my new apartment door at around 7 at night. It was my dad. I had no idea how he'd found my address, but I suspected my mom had wheedled it out of Nathan. He walked in without an invitation, his eyes scanning my sparse studio with a critical air. It's small, he observed. It's what I can't afford. I replied, my arms crossed. He sat down in the single chair I owned and got straight to the point. We need to talk. Your mother is worried about Julie. She's been struggling. I waited, saying nothing. This situation with you has made things harder for her, he continued. A bitter laugh escaped me. How did me throwing away a moldy container affect her work stress? You're missing the point, he said, his patience wearing thin. Then he dropped the bombshell. Julie broke up with her boyfriend, the one she was with for 4 years. The news hit me like a physical shock. They had been together for ages. I thought they were going to get married. Apparently, it had happened right around the time I moved in with her. She'd never said a word. My parents knew, he explained, but Julie asked them not to tell you. She didn't want to seem weak, like she was going through a hard time. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Having you there was supposed to help her feel less alone. Instead, you made her feel disrespected in her own home. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture that was both clearer and infinitely more frustrating. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked, my voice tight. If I had known she was going through a breakup, I would have been more understanding. It wasn't your business, he retorted flatly. That was it. That was her logic. It explained her volatility, but it didn't excuse it. The lack of communication was staggering. He left soon after, leaving me to process this new information. Knowing about the breakup provided context, but it didn't make her actions right. If anything, it made me angrier that my entire family had conspired to keep me in the dark while simultaneously blaming me for a situation I couldn't possibly have understood. 2 days later, Julie called. It was the first time I'd heard her voice in over 2 months. After some stilted small talk about my new job and apartment, she took a deep breath. I want to talk about what happened, she began. I know the container thing seems small, but it represented something bigger to me. She explained that with the breakup and the stress at work, her life had felt completely out of her control. Her condo, her space, was the one thing that felt stable, the one thing that was entirely hers. When you threw it away without asking, she said, her voice wavering slightly, it made me feel like I didn't even have control in my own home. It felt like you were taking that away from me. I opened my mouth to respond, to ask why she couldn't have just said that, but she kept talking. I was overwhelmed, and I reacted badly, she admitted. It was the closest she'd come to an apology. I just want you to understand where I was coming from. I can understand being stressed, Julie, I said, my voice measured. But kicking me out, making me homeless over it, that still feels extreme. A long silence stretched between us. I don't think we're going to agree on this, she finally said. Just before she hung up, she added one last thing that made my blood run cold. I miss having you around, but I can't deal with your attitude about this whole thing. I don't have an attitude, I countered, baffled. I just think the punishment didn't fit the crime. That phrase right there, she said, her voice turning sharp again. That's the problem. You see it as me punishing you, instead of me setting a boundary. And then she was gone. I told Nathan about the call, and he summed it up perfectly. She sounds like she's trying to justify what she did, not apologize for it. It was true. She was reframing her insane overreaction as a healthy boundary, a therapeutic buzzword that absolved her of all responsibility. When my mom called the next day to tell me I'd been difficult with Julie, I finally snapped and hung up on her. I was done. I had a job, a home. I was building a life away from their toxic, circular logic. But it wasn't over. About a month later, my dad called me at work, his voice stern. You need to come to the house this weekend for a family discussion. I told him I had plans. Cancel them, he ordered. I hung up. That Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, Julie was at my door. She looked different, thinner, with shorter hair. She wanted to clear the air. She sat awkwardly on my couch and admitted that kicking me out might have been too harsh. She proposed we start rebuilding our relationship with monthly dinners. Does this mean you're apologizing? I asked. She stiffened. I'm trying to find a middle ground. That's not an apology, I said. And I don't think you owe me one, she replied coolly. We went back and forth, two planets in different orbits, until she finally left, frustrated. A week later, my mom called from a blocked number, accusing me of making Julie cry. Then came the anonymous text from unknown numbers, telling me to stop being cruel to my sister. It was a coordinated campaign of harassment, and I blocked every number. I saw Julie once at a grocery store. We made eye contact across the aisles. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something, but then she just turned and walked away. My dad showed up one last time, but I refused to let him in. You're tearing this family apart, he yelled through the door. I threw away a moldy container and got kicked out. I yelled back. What does that make me the villain? He had no answer. The real breakthrough came 2 months ago from a call I almost ignored. It was my Aunt Carol, my mom's sister, who lives across the country. We hadn't spoken in years. She'd heard from my mom, of course, who had called her crying about how I was refusing to reconcile. My aunt asked to hear my side of the story, so I told her everything, from the job loss to my dad yelling through my door. She listened patiently, without interruption. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. This sounds so familiar, she finally said, her voice heavy. This is exactly how your mother treated me when we were younger. She painted a picture of my mother that I recognized with a sickening clarity. A woman who always had to be right, who constructed narratives where she was the hero or the victim, and who demanded absolute loyalty. She creates situations where you have to choose a side, my aunt explained. And if you don't choose her side, you're the enemy. That's why I moved so far away. She suspected my mom had worked on Julie for months, convincing her that my actions were a grave insult, backing her into a corner where she couldn't back down without admitting our mother was wrong. It was never about the container. It was about control. That hour-long conversation was more therapeutic than anything I could have imagined. It validated every feeling of craziness I'd had. Family isn't worth destroying yourself over, she told me before we hung up. A month ago, my dad slipped an envelope under my door. It was a 3-page letter from Julie. She'd started seeing a therapist who was helping her understand that she had projected all her pain and feelings of failure from her breakup onto me. Having me, there was supposed to make her feel successful, the competent older sister taking care of her floundering brother. When I threw away the container, her container, in her fridge, it shattered that illusion, reminding her that she wasn't in control of anything. It was a raw, honest letter, and at the end, she finally wrote the words, "I am so sorry for kicking you out." She also mentioned that our mom would be furious if she knew she'd written it. I didn't respond. A couple of weeks later, I saw her car parked outside my building. She was just sitting in it. This happened 3 more times. The 4th time, I went downstairs and knocked on her window. What are you doing, Julie? I asked when she rolled it down. I don't know, she whispered, her eyes red. I want to talk, but I don't know what to say. Did you get my response to your letter? I asked. You didn't respond, she said, confused. I know. She looked at me, her face crumpling. I meant the apology, she cried. It was an apology, I said, my voice softer than I intended. But it came after months of my entire family telling me I was the problem. It came after you told me my attitude was the issue. She started to sob, real, racking sobs. I know I messed up, she said between gasps. Mom convinced me you were being disrespectful and ungrateful. By the time I realized she was manipulating both of us, it was too late. I didn't know how to fix it. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw not the family star, but a person just as lost as I was. I don't think it can be fixed, Julie, I said quietly. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about self-preservation. The wound was too deep, the trust too broken. Does that mean you're cutting me off? She asked, her voice small. I'm not cutting anyone off, I replied. I'm just not going to keep trying to repair something that our family is designed to break. She understood. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and drove away. I haven't heard from them since. My Aunt Carol and I email every few weeks. Nathan and Kelly just got engaged and asked me to be a groomsman. Life is quiet now. The job is steady. I bought a decent couch. Sometimes I wonder if Julie and I will ever speak again, but mostly, I just live my life. It's a small life, but it's mine, and that is finally enough.